Okay, so this next lesson combines two sections. I wanted to condense these two into one because I feel like these two lessons kind of work together anyways. And it's a pretty simple concept, and it's hopefully a lot of review. So hopefully you're able to kind of work through this one quickly and move on to some newer stuff. So this lesson talks about operations with real numbers. So that means adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. So one quick thing I want us to understand before we start is what I mean when I say the absolute value. So the absolute value of a number is that number's distance from zero on a number line. Absolute value is always non-negative because it's a distance. We always talk about distances as being non-negative. So the absolute value of 5 is represented like that. It's just 5. 5 is 5 away from 0 on the number line. The absolute value of negative 5 is 5, because negative 5 is 5 away from 0 on the number line. So when you think about absolute value, yes, when you evaluate absolute value, it's always non-negative, meaning you think it's always positive, but it really means distance from 0 on the number line. So some tricks for adding real numbers. When you add two numbers with the same sign, add their absolute values. So if you have 3 plus 4, absolute value of 3, absolute value of 4, 3 plus 4 is 7. Negative 3, negative 4. Add their absolute values together, that's 7, and you keep the same sign as the numbers you're adding. So that's when you're adding numbers with the same sign, okay? Adding numbers with the same sign. When you add numbers with different signs, you subtract their absolute values. The sum has the same sign as the number with the bigger value. So what I mean by that is you take 4 minus 3, since these are opposite signs and you're adding, 4 minus 3 is 1. The absolute value of the bigger number is 4. So 4 is positive, meaning our solution, our sum, would be positive. For 3 plus negative 4, 4 minus 3 is 1. We take the sign of the bigger number in the sum, which would be negative 4, meaning our solution is negative 1, our sum is negative 1. So just a quick few problems here about the sum. 12 plus negative 7, those are opposite signs. So I would take 12 minus 7 is 5, since they're opposite signs. And I take the sign of the larger number in the sum. So that's negative 5, okay? Part B, I've got negative 18 plus negative 2. Those are the same sign, same sign. So I'm going to add those together, get 20. If they're the same sign, it keeps the sign of both numbers, it's negative 20. For C, those are opposite signs. So I'm going to subtract them. So I'm going to take 9.5 minus 4.8. I'm going to get 4.7. And I keep the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value. 9.5 is a bigger absolute value, so my sum is positive. Okay? Part D, I threw in some fractions just for fun. With those, might help to get a common denominator. So this would become a common denominator of 12. 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 3 is 9. 6 times 2 is 12. 5 times 2 is 10. So when we look at these, they're opposite signs. So I subtract, meaning 10 minus 9 is 1. So 1/12. And I keep the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value, meaning this is going to be negative, since the number with the bigger absolute value is 10 over 12, and it's negative. So our sum is negative. So here's a good chance to pause the video, work through some problems on your own, and check your answers. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to work through my solutions. Sorry. I'm going to work through my solutions, and then you check them in a few seconds. All right, so for these, I didn't show any work. And to be honest, if you used a calculator on these, there's no way of me really knowing, but it's just me showing you some strategies to adding and subtracting some positive and negative numbers. So this helps you do some mental math later on. So Negative 16 plus negative 8. Same sign. I add their absolute values together. That's 24. I keep the sign if they're both negative. I keep the sign if they're both positive. So my sum is negative. For part B, they are opposite signs. So I take 11 minus 9. I get 2. I keep the sign of the bigger absolute value, which is negative 11. Okay? And then C, same as B, just flipped around. Opposite signs, subtract. Keep the sign of the number with the bigger absolute value. And then D, same sign, add them together. 8. Keep the signs of both numbers if they're both the same sign. So that's negative 8. Moving to subtraction. Really, subtraction, I like always rewriting it as addition. So if I'm subtracting two things, you could write it as plus and negative. It's a very useful tool because then you're just back to adding. So it's just rewriting the subtraction as addition. So in problem 2, negative 8 minus negative 13, I'll write it as changing the sign of both, okay? So plus and negative, should have said that a little bit better, plus the opposite sign is really what we should be thinking. So negative 8 minus negative 13 is like negative 8 plus 13. And using our shortcut or our trick from before, these are opposite signs being added together. So I subtract, that's 5. I keep the sign of the number with a bigger absolute value. So it's positive because 13 has a bigger absolute value. For B, I'm going to write it as 3.5 plus a negative 12.4. So again, opposite signs, I would subtract them. All right, let me double check. So 12.4 minus 3.5 is 8.9. And I take the sign of the number with a bigger absolute value, which would be 12.4, making our sum negative. C. I can still write this as plus and negative. 9 plus negative 9. So when I think about it, they're opposite signs, so I subtract them. 9 minus 9 is 0. Sign doesn't matter because 0 really doesn't have a sign at all. 0 is not positive or negative. Okay, and then moving ahead to the got it here. Take it a second, pause it, work through it, and then check your answers. Okay, so for the got it, all I did was I rewrote this as adding the opposite. So adding the opposite means adding positive 8.7. And I just add those numbers together since they're the same sign. And I keep the signs positive since they were both positive. So I got 13.5. And then for part B there, little tricky, little critical thinking. But what I thought of was if A equals B. Because if they equal each other, it's going to be 0 equals 0. So I think that would be any value where they equal each other is what I thought of instantly. So an example would be 5 and 5. You know, doesn't matter if I subtract 5 and 5, 5 and 5. Now, if these numbers were different at all, it wouldn't make any sense. If I had 4 and 5, 5 minus 4, 4 minus 5, not the same thing. Okay, so that's just a quick check. I mean, that one's tougher. That's some abstract thinking. So what I'll have you guys do now is I still want to work through problem 3. Still want to show you it. I know this video is getting a little long, but I want to see if I can show this one to you quickly and then have you move on to the next step. So in problem 3, it talks about a reef explorer diving and then rising and then diving and then rising. So you just got to think about when we're talking about representing positive and negative numbers here, I would think you start at, sea or the water level. You dive in. So you start at basically 0 feet above or below the level of the water. And if you dive 25 feet, I would say that's like you're, going further underwater, right? You're going down, okay? And then if you rise 16 feet, I would think that represents going up, going towards the water level, and then diving another, I'm gonna dive, so I'm gonna make that negative 47 feet, and then the diver rises to 29 feet, okay? So it's just being able to tell when it says dive, I think that means subtract, that means go down. Rise, I would think that means go up. So when I'm simplifying this, I would just simplify this from left to right. So this would be 0 plus negative 25 would be negative 25. I know that seems like a weird, but I just want to break this down as slowly as I can to make sure I'm showing each step, okay? Because that's important, especially when we get into our next chapters, all right? So then I keep simplifying. Negative 9 plus negative 4, it's negative 47, sorry. Negative 47 plus 29. So negative 9 plus negative 47, that would be negative 56 plus 29. And then I would get to the end, I'd subtract those two. So negative 56 plus 29, it's going to be, he's going to be 27 feet below where he hits that cavern, okay? So just being able to read, tell what would probably represent addition and subtraction, all right? So this would be a good point to move on to the next step, work through a little bit of practice. This lesson should go by fairly quickly other than me over-explaining these notes, okay?